Mike Palmer here. Welcome back to Trending in Education. We have a special treat. Today we have an episode of an upcoming podcast called Running It Back, featuring a friend of the show, Tarlin, Ray, and myself. And this one's about the 1999 playoffs. Playoffs. Very similar to some of the things we're seeing down at the bubble. We didn't want to hold it back until the formal launch of Running It Back, since some of it is pretty topical. We try to keep it zeitgeisty, keep it frosty, and hopefully you enjoy. We'll be back soon with regular Trending in Education, and thanks as always for listening. Thanks for joining us today on Running It Back, the Lessons Learned podcast talking about sports and the world around us. This is Mike Palmer. I'm joined as always by Tarlin Ray. Tarlin, how are you on this fine day?
I have two things to say. One, for all you longtime listeners, Running It Back. Whenever we say Running It Back, it's hard for me to say those words out loud. Some of you know I ruptured my Achilles in sheltering in place, but just went to the doctor this week and was able to walk down the hall on my toes without any noticeable limp.
Nice.
So I will be running it back sooner than you think.
Nice.
So I'm doing great.
That's awesome. And little known fact about you, Tarlin, you always just walk around on your toes, right? That's just
exactly.
You just
it's like my own version of strength trainers. Most of you don't know that.
Exactly.
In the late 80s, we'll run a little series on running it back on some of the worst athletic training equipment.
Yeah.
Number two,
yeah,
I'm excited for you.
Yes.
Because on this episode, we will be covering the strike-shortened 1998-1999 season of the NBA.
Mm-hmm.
There might be a team that you are really passionate about that made some small run.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm looking forward to just the excitement and enthusiasm and just the full fandom that's going to come out during this podcast.
Well, I appreciate that, because as a Knicks fan, things got pretty sad pretty fast after 1999. And we didn't even win 1999. We only spoiler alert for those of you who don't remember what happened.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
But yeah, the Knicks did not win in 1999, but there was a heck of a run, made a heck of a run there. So yeah, but the reason we brought it up, in addition to me getting excited about this as a Knicks fan, where it was really a heroic run, and it's fun to go back, and a lot to talk about. Latrell Sprewell, the Ewing theory, which is a theory famously espoused by Bill Simmons about how a team that loses its best player suddenly performs better because they have a motivation to rally.
I thought that was the cold lottery card, so you could pick the card to make sure.
That's the Ewing conspiracy theory.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So it's a common misconception. But beyond that, what we were thinking, and the other related point, is the Knicks 8th seed. The only time an 8th seed has made it to the NBA Finals, and in part that was because it was a strike-shortened season. Had they had a full 82-game season, they probably would have slotted in, maybe not the 8th seed, who knows. But the year was abbreviated due to a work stoppage. Patrick Ewing was the head of the Players Union at the time. And we were thinking about how, as the bubble is about to float out there, is that what it does? Float out there in the world gently? No, bubbles always burst too. It's a very scary analogy. But as the NBA launches into the bubble season of 2020, or at least heading into the playoffs of 2020, starting with the 2019 season, it's going to be abbreviated similarly to that year. The work stoppage was prior to the beginning of the season. So they started on February 5th. They wound up playing 50 games in 90 days. So a very compressed schedule in 1999. And got kind of fluxy, got a little upsy downsy, wacky action coming from the Knicks there as an 8th seed. But lots for us to think about today. Some analogies, perhaps, Tarlin? Anything you can analogize, perhaps, between 1999 and 2020?
Well, a couple things. One, it's the first time that the NBA had lost any games to inability for the Players Union and the owners to come to agreement.
Mm-hmm.
this came to a head because the owners in their 6-year agreement had, after 3 years, had an option to renegotiate. But at the end of the day, it all came down to money, right? And you see it in other leagues. They were fighting over, and part of it was actually the Larry Bird exception, where to keep your own player, you could throw funny money around. You know, the percentage of basketball-related revenue that was going to the players peaked at 57%, and the owners were unhappy. So if you think about that strike shortened season, in a day, 50 games in 90 days, that is crazy.
Yeah.
You're talking about load management for players now.
Right.
I mean, I can't imagine, I can't believe there weren't a few more injuries coming out of that.
Right.
But it's the same thing that's happening. 2020 season, Matt topped out at 67 games. They're going to play 8 more. So they're basically playing a full season.
Right.
And then they're still going to see if they can do it without fans. It all comes down to money. And
also getting back to normalcy, right? You know,
sure, the normalcy with everyone in a bubble in Florida eating dry food, no fans, which is cool actually with how they're piping in fan noise and the court looks, but still.
Yeah. But it's also the alternative is you don't name an NBA champion, which has never happened. Since the NBA was founded, they have always named a champion. And honestly, you don't hear much about 99 as an asterisk season. Unless
you're Phil Jackson or Shaq.
Unless you're someone who wants to dig a little deeper.
Unless you're Phil Jackson, who's probably one of the best trolls in the NBA. 2-3 years, even beyond, because Spurs are always such a big rival. Lakers will always say that should be an asterisk. And then Shaq recently. I actually don't. They're going to play almost 90, or someone do the math.
Yeah.
Someone doing the math for us? Okay. I'll come back with the number.
Producer,
they're going to play a large percentage of the games. And then they're going to have the playoffs. So why would this be considered an asterisk?
Right. Well,
the only difference is you're not having to play in front of hostile environments. 91%, by the way.
Nice.
Thank you, fact checker calculator. Although in not playing in hostile environments, it's still competition. So
right. The reason why it could be an asterisk is what if Giannis or LeBron or Kawhi get COVID in the playoffs? How will people look at it? As a Knicks fan, it is interesting to think about what would have happened had Ewing been healthy, which again, maybe had the season not been so compressed. He was 35 towards the tail end of his career, starting to lose a step when he wasn't the fastest guy to begin with. He's a big fella. But the big fella, and he had an Achilles injury too. That's what knocked him out. But had that not happened, they were able to muster the heroic will to unseat the Pacers without Ewing, and they won a game, and they really should have won game 5 even without Ewing. So the question is whether Van Gundy could have managed the dynamics of when Ewing's in there, it's Ewing's team. And part of what he was able to do, the lesson in leadership from the Van Gundy side, was that he was ready to be responsive and opportunistic to the opportunity that presented itself. He had to take a shot. He had more athleticism in the lineup that he wound up with Camby and Latrell Sprewell. And he decided to really work that set of matchups, which were very different from the team that was slowed up and clogged up to a certain extent by the big fella being back to the basket, counting down the 24-second clock at every trip. Instead, they were more wide open. They were more freestyling as an offense. And he was able to unlock some of the really inspired play out of some of his more emotional players, including Latrell Sprewell, a young Marcus Camby, and Charlie Ward, to your point. You know, Charlie Ward, the Heisman Trophy winner, Charlie Ward, your national champion, Florida State Seminole, Charlie Ward, who wound up being a serviceable point guard in the NBA.
So let's close the book on 2020, 2019, 2020. Let's go to that season. But I think it's a fair point. What happens is Giannis or LeBron or one of those guys go down. We won't know until right now they're in a bubble.
So far, so good too, right?
So far, so good. People who are crossing the line to like get a Postmates have to then re-quarantine, but so far, so good. But it will be like the Nets. They're pulling guys, 4 guys off the street that literally are not. They were out of the NBA.
Right.
It's different, but if you start to see an impact to the big teams, then we will save the asterisk conversation for another time. But I feel like we wouldn't be doing justice if we didn't set the stage for 1998-99.
Yeah.
For those who listen to The Last Dance, Jordan, as the work stoppage is happening, officially announces his retirement.
Yeah.
So the mantle is passed. You would think that the Indiana Pacers, who took Jordan to 7, would be the team of destiny.
Yeah.
And then we have this ragtag group of Knicks players.
Yeah.
That are destiny bound. Now, most people would say, shocked, Ewing goes down. But a funny little stat, I know you mentioned Charlie Ward and he won a Heisman.
Mm-hmm.
There were 5 Wooden Award winners in the finals.
Wow.
And the Knicks had 2 of them. Mm-hmm. And one of them wasn't Ewing, who I think came in second a couple years in a row.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Larry Johnson,
I
Marcus Camby.
Ah, that makes sense. Yeah.
David Robinson, Sean Elliott,
mm-hmm.
Tim Duncan. So it was a scrappy group. Mm-hmm. But what you're pointing at is there's a lot of talent there. And in Ewing going down, I think Van Gundy had the ability to mix and match the players in a way that he would not probably have had the ability to do unless his mainstay went down.
Yeah. And it is also that leadership opportunity where you basically need to put up or shut up. It's like, this is it, and as a leader, Van Gundy was not, he was quintessentially vulnerable, right? Like he was about to lose his job and he had to get buy-in from the team. And the only way he was keeping his job was if this team believed they could do more than the rest of the intelligentsia thought. At the same time, they had disappointed during the regular season. So I think there was still some potential, but part of why Van Gundy was likely to lose his job had they been knocked out in the first round was that they had underperformed. And then when it all started to come together, there was a lot of hope. Then they lost Ewing, and he was able to still pivot that. And I got to give credit to the blend there that you had. The fact that there was no alpha male, which I think is an interesting concept that's out there lots of times, where you have to say, who's the best player on the floor, and this team is that person's team. I think in the case of the 1999 Knicks, flux a year, strike shortened, everything's crazy. I get it. Y2K was on the horizon, so everyone's freaking out. But if you look at that team, Allen Houston, definitely the most highly paid player, very low-key shooter, mild-mannered player. Sprewell, probably his team to a certain extent, but he had just come there after serving a 68-game suspension for choking his coach, PJ Carlissimo, in practice in December of 1997. So he came back from that, missed the beginning of the season because of the strike. So he missed basically all of 1998 because he was suspended by the NBA for the year, and then had the season started as scheduled, it would have been in 1998, but didn't start until February. And then Sprewell, when he was coming back, a lot of Knicks fans were questioning the move. He was traded for John Starks, Knicks legend, Knicks hero.
Jordan Stopper.
The way I see Sprewell is he's a stronger, more athletic version of John Starks. He's just a lot smoother, and defensively, he made a lot of steals where you were just like, wait, where's the ball? He would anticipate the camera. The camera would still be going where the flow of the game was, and then he'd come back in the other direction. And between him and Camby, it was just fun as a Knicks fan for that brief moment in time for them to be a little more wide open and a little more wheeling and dealing, even though they didn't really have the ball handler. I'll never forget, even that first round matchup was against the Pat Riley Miami Heat, the 1 seed, who the Knicks had just beaten the season before. We kind of had their number. And going into that series, I think the Knicks felt pretty confident that they could take them. And then I remember Game 5, I was on University of Florida campus in the Student Union watching Game 5 on the TV down there. And I think I literally I fell to the ground. When Allen Houston hit that shot, I just remember the 2 shots that I remember being, actually 3 shots, I remember being floored in the 90s as a Knicks fan. The last one was at least positive. The first one was the Kukoc shot. The second was the Reggie Miller 8 points in 6 seconds. That's all it blurred to me.
Yeah.
And then this was the third. I just remember once they hit that shot, it's also like you're in this quantum reality as a fan, as a team, where you're like, we could very easily lose in the first round. But then once you win in the first round, they closed the season 6-2. You know, they started to get it together after going 21-21, and then got a little bit of momentum, lost the big fella, but you get the sense that that almost released them from any expectations, because there was still whatever baggage Patrick Ewing and that legacy of the Knicks had around making it so far but not quite making it there. And, you know, he was, if only he had a better supporting cast with him, and now he finally had Sprewell with him, maybe this is their chance to make it. And now that narrative is gone. And they're almost in like a post-narrative, post-alpha male. We're just feeling it and playing basketball together. It was a lot of fun to watch, honestly. It was fun to rewatch some of these games.
But just think about where they ended up, because in that season, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it was one of the first times the Knicks had one of the highest payrolls. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of expectation behind it.
It was the highest payroll, yeah.
The highest payroll. Ernie Grunfeld, who is the GM, and Van Gundy are at each other's throats. Grunfeld wants to. He's acquired assets that are able to get out. Marcus Camby.
Yeah.
Charles Sprewell still in his prime. Houston can still go.
Yeah.
Van Gundy wants to have more of a plotting. You got Charlie Ward is not going to be a go. He's going to set up the offense. You got you're going to wait for Ewing to get down the court.
Yeah.
And ultimately in that season, Grunfeld gets fired.
Yeah.
So Van Gundy wins the Game of Thrones. But what ended up happening is, because Ewing goes down, he actually, the assets he put in place were actually, the game that he wanted Van Gundy to play was the one he ended up playing.
Yeah.
Because he lost that alpha. So it's just interesting. If
layers upon layers. I was thinking Game of Thrones too. Yeah.
If Ewing goes down in the regular season, Van Gundy and Grunfeld coexist, because it's almost, you're not using my toys properly. I got these guys and I have a vision for it. So that's one. Two, after Van Gundy is fighting so hard to play, his plotting approach, and listen, congrats on that season. But when you look back at some of the scores, it's like 77, 76. Like,
it's not all about scoring, Tarlin. Basketball involves other aspects than just scoring.
Horrible basketball. But Van Gundy, though, has to also humble himself, because part of the friction with the GM was the style of play, and he had to change on the fly his style of play. And he had to do it in the playoffs.
Yeah. And he had to do it to start. He had to do it against his former guide, his guru in Pat Riley, who had groomed him when Riley was coaching the Knicks. Then Riley took his talents to South Beach.
First one to ever do it.
And then even Stan Van Gundy was an assistant under Riley, as was Eric Spoelstra. So Riley has this whole lineage of people in his coaching tribe. But it was tough going for him when he started in Miami. I was looking back over the history. They obviously warmed up and won a championship with Wade and Shaq later on. But those first few years, they were kind of paper tigers in the playoffs. Playoffs? They generally would be strong in the regular season, and then they were notorious for the brawls. I mean, they'd be brawling into this. This is the Jeff Van Gundy grabbing hold of Alonzo Mourning's leg and being shook violently. Like, the coach of the Knicks had his arms wrapped around the leg of the center of the Miami Heat, who was trying to shake him off. This actually happened, Tarlin.
That's normally what you're supposed to do in a fight. I'm going to go for the lower leg.
Well, if you've seen his size, he's not the.
Of course.
But speaking of size, I also saw Sprewell was listed as 6'5", 190.
Yeah.
So he's a lean, mean dude, and
also was dominant in Golden State. You don't get that talent unless you have a problem. So one of the things you and I talked about was, it's a season where Ewing's not in his prime, but it's also, there are some reclamation projects. Like, how does Camby get traded to the Knicks? He's he's a shot blocker, unbelievable rebounder. You don't get Latrell unless he had problems elsewhere.
Yeah.
We talked about this looking at other sports. Belichick has been one to consistently bring on reclamation projects and put them in a system, and they've thrived.
Yeah.
Whether it's Randy Moss, Corey Dillon, and others.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Sprewell, there's a lot to learn from. There's a lot to learn from his troubles, where bringing a 2x4 back after you get in an altercation with a teammate during practice, and then you come back with a 2x4, and then you threaten to come back with a gun. That's some serious stuff. So you got to work through those things.
But hit a little early Gilbert Arenas in him.
Yeah, he had some issues, and then he winds up really losing it. I would have had trouble if I was coached by PJ Carlesimo too. I don't think many of us would be like, "Oh my God,
to him.
Coach PJ." Really, thanks so much for all your wonderful beration. But yeah, so he made a mistake. He accepted that he made the mistake, and then for this to be the first playing action he saw after taking a full year off, and he came out on fire, and he made this team meaningfully better. Sadly, they fell short, but I still think there's some inspiration to be had there. I think there's a little bit of reflection that I think any of us would need to have. When might we as leaders or as people who are trying to understand where things are heading, when might we fall in love with the old playbook to our own detriment? Had they not traded for Sprewell and Camby, I don't think the Knicks team that they had, an aging John Starks and aging Terry Cummings and Charles Oakley with an aging Ewing, that team was done, and it took some foresight, even though he wound up losing his job, took some foresight to actually let go of what had been your winning hand to mix it up, because the only way they were going to win was to shift tactics. Their hand was forced by the Achilles injury to Ewing. But it's just a reminder to be flexible and to be opportunistic with the talent that you have. I don't necessarily fall too much in love with the star culture and building a team around a single player, because you may wind up losing that player and you may be surprised by what would happen. Can you affect that type of leadership in your day-to-day? It's hard. That's part of why we're talking about lessons learned.
Yeah, and we're spending a lot of time on the blue and orange. I think we do need to actually spend just a moment talking about the team that won the actual championship.
Actually won. Yeah,
most people don't say who, like you say, who won in 2003? And like, oh, no, I just want to know who was the runner-up. So,
yeah.
San Antonio Spurs. Popovich is in his second full season and a quarter. He had fired Brian Hill a year before. He's the GM, and now he's GM and coach. This is Pop before he's Pop.
Mm-hmm.
He's got the Twin Towers and David Robinson, who's it's the same thing. David Robinson's on the tail end of his career.
Yeah.
Tim Duncan is an all-world talent, but still deferring. They start the season horribly to the point where I think they're 6-8.
Mm-hmm.
And Popovich brings in Avery Johnson, and David Robinson has them come over to the house and basically lets them know, if we don't win, I'm just letting you know, if we don't win the next game, there's possibility of a coaching change.
Even though it was 1999, it was probably over a nice bottle of wine or two.
Sure. He was still making sure everyone had something to drink.
Yeah.
And then to have the team rally around the coach.
Mm-hmm.
So players only meeting on the bus, Avery Johnson calls out Robinson and Duncan and says they need to do more. Robinson's willing to defer and stop being the guy who's scoring 50 points in all world.
Mm-hmm.
And basically sees, I got this unbelievable talent in Duncan, and we need to make sure we ride with him.
Mm-hmm.
That next game, both of them have unbelievable stats. They then went on a little 7-game run, but to end the season, they won 31 and 36 games.
Mm-hmm.
So you talk about the lessons learned, and we talked about for the Knicks, it's an underdog story.
Mm-hmm.
You often, as teams, whether it's business or others, you can come together if people don't believe, or you have a common mission and everyone is bought in.
Yeah.
I think for the Spurs, the collection of parts, they knew they weren't going to do anything unless people were willing to play roles, to buy in, and to put some egos aside. And so they did that early. The Knicks were more a surprise. The Spurs, we talked about it before we got on, they rolled people, rolled my Lakers. They had only lost one game leading into the finals.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it was not flash. They really only have one scorer on the outside, and Sean Elliott.
Mm-hmm.
Sean Elliott, who had to get a kidney replacement after the season.
Right.
So he's playing invisibly hurt, but playing noticeably hurt the whole time.
Yeah.
And then, to come up against a Knicks team that was super talented, but those guys had found that had clicked in earlier.
Mm-hmm.
into their persona and who they were. Imagine the Knicks team. You say, what if Ewing wasn't there? What if Ewing was there in the finals? What if he wasn't there for majority of the season?
Right.
That identity would have clicked in, so it would have been a different game. But you appreciate that because most of the time, if you read prior to the season, start of the 2020-21 season, everyone's going to pick the Bucks. That's not the story that's interesting. It's the one that comes from nowhere, and you get the backstory of a small trade that changed the dynamic of the locker room and people are playing together. That's why that season was super interesting for me when you did some research on those Spurs and the Knicks. That's why even going now to 2020 and 2020, it's interesting because they played 67 games together where teams had their identity. Milwaukee's rolling people. Lakers are number one in Western Conference. And now they had to spend 4 months away trying to maintain that cultural imprint, that togetherness, making sure guys are still working out. In a very short period of time, they're supposed to restart. So,
and then restarted in this sci-fi setting of the bubble with social distancing and masks and all that.
So interesting parallels. The one thing I will say is if you're going to have a team in the 90s, make sure Steve Kerr's in your team because you're going to win the championship.
He wound up on this team too. That's a good point. Yeah.
The unsung spot up shooter who probably is helping a young Duncan and Robinson understand how to cohabitate and having stars play together. That helps. And then having a Mario Ellie who won 2 titles with the Rockets. You just had a little more there for the Spurs. But I will, it's a tip of my cap. I loved watching that Knicks team. I was rooting for that Knicks team.
It was hard not to root for that team. That's why this season, if you haven't done the research, you haven't gone on the Wayback Machine, hopefully we've inspired you a little bit to check it out. And who knows, maybe this year, maybe a Cinderella story comes together in the bubble. Maybe something crazy happens and a team catches fire, a low seed. Another thing I was reminded of here is that the 1995 Houston Rockets were in a full season, 82-game season, were a six seed, who won the championship too. And I guess I pull for the underdog. That's part of why I like March Madness is, you occasionally see the upsets, and I'm kind of hoping in this crazy world of ours we'll see a little bit of surprises because the NBA is very skewed towards super teams right now, where if the Lakers, if one of the LA teams, or maybe the Rockets, but really it's one of the LA teams out of the West, anything else is a big surprise. And then the East, it's obviously Milwaukee and then maybe Boston, maybe someone else, but the odds are pretty heavily skewed in terms of what people are thinking and what Vegas is saying and what the odds makers are saying, that it's really going to be one of these super teams making it, all the way to the finals. Be kind of fun if a team caught fire, but I think it might be tough after a 4-month hiatus to kind of catch lightning in a bottle and get hot down there. But after all, Tarlin, that's why they play the games, right?
Why they play the games.
So my last thought here is that the San Antonio Spurs are really good at being a phenomenal team that you don't really talk about. And Tim Duncan is a quintessential top 5, top 10 all-time basketball players who is so eminently forgettable, except if you watch him play. And if you watch him play, you have to admire his artistry. So maybe some way to give Duncan his due is that I had a hard time remembering how dominant he was, because he kind of just puts a baby to sleep. It's not the exciting style of play. He's not a high energy, high charisma for the fans. This really was his launch into a storied career. It's also because they didn't win back-to-backs or triples. They always would win and then be competitive, but for some reason it would take 3 or 4 years before they would come back and win again. But also, for those of you who are curious about the history of the NBA and super teams, 1999, this was the Spurs' first trip to the NBA Finals, and they won. And with the Popovich and Duncan party going on for another, really almost 20 years, where they were consistently a contender in the playoffs and then many times making it to the finals. How many did they ultimately win? You said there was an asterisk?
How many did The Spurs one? I thought
Yeah.
it was 4 or 5. He's 4 or 5.
I think it's 5. But
once again, we will have our crack team fact checkers, because this is what we're about. We're all about
5.
facts.
So any final thoughts, Tarlin? Final thoughts?
Yeah, so we're able to geek out about this because even though the strike shortened season, it brought joy to have that team and some underdog teams playing in the playoffs. I just got word in my ear that it's 5. Duncan at 5.
Yeah.
We hope that they come back in the bubble. I'm hoping for no injuries, no COVID surprises.
Yep.
And just for the guys, just to see some competition. We miss it. Even though we're in this weird world, it's healthier for people to have some sort of distraction, which is what entertainment always was. As you see all movies getting pushed back on their releases, this is the water cooler talk in the same way that The Last Dance was for many of us. So I'm looking forward to the season. I'm glad we were able to cover this. We have about 20 other shows we want to do, and I'm so happy we'll never talk about the Knicks again because they're just not relevant.
Lynn Saturday. I think we might get a Lynn Saturday show in there. I think that might still qualify.
Sorry, I forgot we had that on the docket. We'll just move that back because he's played for a lot of teams. So.
All right. Well, hopefully again, we're hoping for the best and try to run it back a little bit, see what we can learn from history. I think that 1999 was an interesting year, and it's worth spending a little time understanding what happened back there. We'll be back again soon. Thanks as always for listening. Follow us on Twitter, subscribe, enjoy, do all the good things, and we'll be back again soon on Running It Back.